Diapers on a Plane. In our last podcast, we talked about flying standby. Now we're going to talk about Mayan ruins.
Mayan ruins are all about being in my mommy's tummy. Mayan ruins are so fascinating because you get to learn how people used to live.
Mayan ruins are great because you get to carry small children up steep, dangerous pyramids.
Visiting Mayan ruins means climbing giant temples. Visiting Mayan ruins means learning about ancient tools. Visiting Mayan ruins means finding cool rocks. Are you ready to learn all about Mayan ruins in Mexico?
We are Diapers on a Plane.
Yes, we are. No, I'm going to say this. So this is our third stinking podcast, and we're so excited to be multi-podcast episoders. That's pretty neat. And so we're going to kick off by talking a little bit about our last podcast.
So in our last podcast, we talked about flying standby, and one of the amazing, incredible places that you can fly standby to is, of course, Cancun, Mexico, where all of the Mayan ruins are. So we've actually been there twice. And the first time we went, we had no intention of visiting Mayan ruins. We just went to Cancun and we stayed in the hotel zone. And after a few days, we got super bored.
Super bored. Yeah, it was like, so eating that hotel food for like 3 days. There was one little play area where the kids could play. It was like this little pirate ship water thing. And it was really fun. But for 3 days, it was a little tough to keep them occupied. And then the beach was nice, but it was full of college kids. And so that was a little rough with little ones too.
We did order about 1,000 virgin margaritas, though, in every possible flavor.
Yeah. And the food wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad stay. So
that Mexican restaurant was actually one of the best Mexican restaurants we've ever had.
That was good stuff.
And so that was at Panama Jack's, if you're wondering.
So the third day, we decided to rent a car, and we actually had it delivered to our hotel, which was awesome. And then we decided to go visit Tulum. And our eyes were kind of like, holy crap, there's other stuff to do. There's other stuff to do in Cancun, and visiting Tulum was amazing. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes.
Well, and partly for me, I was like, oh, no wonder everybody wants to come here. No wonder everybody loves coming here. This is incredible.
And so we're like, Chichen Itza. We didn't see Chichen Itza. Yeah. And really, that's the only other ruin we knew of there, right? And we didn't know there were more. So we knew that we had to go back to Mexico because that was kind of, we didn't see enough after that.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. So are you ready to learn all about the Mayan ruins in Mexico?
Yeah, so we were debating when we were doing this podcast, and we're really hoping to do it all in one take. So bear with us. Full disclosure, our last podcast or two, we've had a lot of arguments about format and how to do it because we're a married couple and that's what you do. And traveling with the kids, and we want to make this something that feels organic and enjoyable to listen to. That's our goal, and we may not succeed perfectly sometimes. But part of that is we Catherine, being the meticulous organizer she is, wrote a big, long history of who the Mayan people were, what they did. And
well, that's what I find most fascinating. I mean, really, my favorite part of travel is the history of a place, is who lived there, what they did there, how did they live there differently than we did? Why is this place a place that we want to go to? And it's only a place we want to go to because of the history. So yes, I am pretty enamored with that.
Right, so
stuff.
to get that out of our system, Catherine, give us a rundown of the Mayans. What's up with those guys?
Well, in the Mexican Riviera, you can actually find ruins from 3 different groups of people. So the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Incas. And the Mayans and the Aztecs are actually pretty hard to tell apart, but the Incas are a little bit different. The most famous ruins that you know the Incas for is Machu Picchu. So they started more in the southern hemisphere, and they kind of weaved their way up into Latin America and then even into the Americas. And then the Mayans and the Aztecs, they started more in the Latin American region, and then they did make their way down a little bit. But they all share a lot of common characteristics. The blood sacrifice, the sporting with the ball courts. They were incredible astronomers and geographers. They knew so much about the land and farming and agriculture. So they all shared all these unique characteristics. And their temples were, of course, ways that they could study the stars. And astrology was the thing that made them the most famous. We have the calendar that's based off of the Mayan culture, and that's what we go by today.
Right. So full disclosure, we are not historians. We love learning about history, but if we say something that may be historically inaccurate, feel free to leave us some nice notes in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of us traveling is to learn these things. So we definitely by no means are saying that we're experts, and we want to learn. We want to see where we did it wrong and figure it out from there.
Okay, so what's next?
All right, so which ruins did we go see?
Right, so we went and saw Tulum in our previous, I think it was last year. Is that last year?
Yeah, we went in 2017. January of 2017. We went to Tulum.
Right. So we just recently came back. It's been a couple months now. You were still pregnant.
With molasses. So we went in August of 2018. So we went for our wedding anniversary.
Yep.
And so the whole reason we chose Tulum for the first trip was because it was the closest. We were trying to decide between Chichen Itza or Tulum, and Chichen Itza was just a little bit farther away. We really also wanted to go see a cenote. We're actually going to talk about those in our next podcast.
Right.
And Tulum was right next to Dos Ojos. So with one day, we figured out that we could make it to Tulum and Dos Ojos, and that would be our full day of adventure.
Yep. So on the podcast, we'll be talking about these places, but hopefully we are doing a simultaneously a YouTube video, so we will have some pictures. So if you want to see the pictures, check us out on our YouTube channel, which is Diapers on a Plane. Easy to find. But let's talk a little bit about Coba. What's up with Coba?
I realized I'm changing to Coba.
I thought we were going to...
We haven't even talked about Tulum.
Oh, let's talk... Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Tulum.
All right, so Tulum is... All of the ancient cities were walled, but most of the walls have been torn down by now. But Tulum is one of the few ancient ruins that still have their wall up. So when we went to Tulum, you literally like crawl through the wall because, you know, the Mayans were much smaller than we are today. So the walls were shorter and the door opening was much shorter. So we literally had to duck under to enter this ancient city.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun with the kids. We did do a tour guide. Are we talking about logistics or are we talking about just the whole experience?
The whole experience.
Okay, so we did get a tour guide when we got there. So we drove, like how we said, we drove a rental car down to Tulum, and when we got there were insane lines just to get into the place. And so we noticed a tour guide coming through, and we quickly found out that if you did hire a tour guide, they took you to the front of the line. And it wasn't that expensive.
And it was so hot. I mean, but the biggest, it wasn't even waiting in the line. It was so hot that we were like, if we can avoid waiting out in this heat, we'll do it.
Yeah, so we had 3 small kids with us.
And it was like an extra $5.
Yeah, it was super cheap. Yeah. And anyway, we got to the front of the line. We had a great tour guide who I think we took turns listening to because our kids were more interested in playing in the grass and looking at the
giant lizards.
Yeah, there were iguanas all over the place.
They were massive.
But the temple ruins themselves were really neat.
So we had this great tour guide, but he had a very thick accent. And I had a really hard time understanding him. And I remember I did ask him a couple questions, and he was a little bit annoyed because he had already answered them. But I didn't know because I couldn't understand him very well. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah, but it was great. I'm trying to think what else. The biggest draw to it is the open spaces, the beautiful temple, but it's on a cliffside. And so after the tour was over, we got to climb down the cliff along some wooden stairs and swim in the ocean.
So the Sun Tower is also a watchtower, so it was effectively a lighthouse, and they would watch for intruders, and they would also watch for the trading ships that came in, and they would alert them. So just really a lot of fascinating things about the city. It was the gateway between the points between the American civilizations and the South American civilizations. So it was incredible. It was really cool. Yeah. We learned a lot of really awesome things.
Yeah, and if you're traveling with kids, it's pretty leisurely walking around, and then they get a swim at the end. So they actually made there were some other same-aged kids there, and so they made some friends. There was
was really fun.
One woman from Europe, was she?
Yeah.
Who had a daughter the same age as our twins, and they played the whole time. They went swimming together. So it was pretty easy to make friends with other families with kids there.
So when you go down to the water at Tulum, the temple is perched on this cliff, and then you walk down these really steep, rickety stairs down to the ocean. And then when you're swimming, you get to look up at the temple. So it was actually really interesting and really fascinating just to think that all these boats came in like the year 500 BC. I mean, this is a really ancient civilization and a really ancient site. And I thought that was really cool. I also loved how the water was crazy. The water was like really rough. I've never swam in an ocean where the water was that rough. There was nothing calm about it. It knocked all of us over.
Yeah, I think that might be it for Tulum. Okay, so next on our list, the second of the 4 ruins we visited while we were in Cancun is Balam. And so we were actually on a tour for that one. That was the Alma LDS tours, which is phenomenal. So what can we say about Balam?
So Balam was our first guided ruins. So the difference between Tulum and Balam was that at Tulum, we didn't learn very much while we were there. Most of what we learned afterward. But at Balam, we had a guide that literally took us step by step through the entire ruins. And I had my phone out and I was like taking notes. We just learned so many really cool things, and we learned what each building was for. We had no idea about the ball courts before we went.
Yeah,
so
we didn't know about that.
We learned all these really cool things. So Balam is really it's not well preserved. It's been reconstructed.
Yeah.
So it's one of the ones they're reconstructing, but they've only uncovered I can't remember specifically what it is, but they've only recovered a fraction of how much is still there. And when you do climb the tower, it's one of the few that you can climb. You can see all the mounds of growth where they still haven't uncovered, but they're mounds because the earth has grown over all of the buildings.
Yeah, and I think as far as I think we had like an hour and a half there total. So our tour guide brought us up to the foot of the main temple there that's being reconstructed, and then talked quite a bit about the culture and all the interesting architectural stuff, like how they built the temples and the shapes and why and all that stuff. And then he kind of let us go free for a little bit. And the nice thing about Balam, if you take your family there, it's not huge, it's not sprawling. It's actually a pretty quick walk to get there. The kids enjoyed it. And then we all hiked up the temple there, which was super steep. Catherine was really pregnant. I was super worried about her.
I was like 7 months pregnant, so I was like scooting down on my rear to come back down the temple because it was so top heavy.
Yeah, and of the group in our tour, only about half of us even wanted to go up the whole thing. So about halfway through, they have some really cool reconstructed murals and statues there.
Yeah, even halfway up, they have a giant snake mouth, because that's what Balam means, and it was the gateway to basically the pit, like where they would sacrifice
toss people off.
Yeah.
Yep. And so
you could see all the giant teeth, and that's what you would go into.
And so our son actually didn't want to go up, so he stayed with half of our tour group that didn't want to go up either. And then I think Widmore was really upset thinking I would fall.
No, Pi was.
Yeah, so our daughter thought that I was going to fall because I was carrying our 3-year-old the whole time. And I was worried that Catherine was going to fall because she was really off balanced. And so I can't remember, did you slide down on your butt?
Yeah, I came back down, yeah.
Yeah, so she had to slide down on her butt going back down because her pregnant belly would have toppled her over. Yeah. So really steep, but really beautiful, and you can see the canopy over the whole thing, and Balam was a real treat.
Yeah, and there was even one of the other things that stood out to me is there's a baptismal font, like a deep baptism by immersion baptismal font in front of the temple, and it was used for a lot of different rituals. And there's a book about it, and I can't remember, but I did post it on my website. I probably should know what that is.
Yeah, and after we saw the ball courts that day, we had to go watch now I can't remember what the movie was.
El Dorado,
the Disney movie with that they play Poke to Poke.
It was DreamWorks.
Yeah. My bad.
So.
Yep. So they played Poke to Poke, and we learned how to play that, and
we learned how to say it. We had a phenomenal guide. We'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. All right, so the next one we went and saw was Chichen Itza. And so Balam and Chichen Itza were on the same tour, and of course, Chichen Itza is one of the wonders of the world.
Yep. So completely different experience.
Yeah.
So I think at Balam they might have had a couple, you could buy some popsicles at the beginning and stuff, but there weren't really any souvenir stands. Chichen Itza was nuts, right? And so that our tour guide told us that he would leave us if we stopped to buy anything on the way in, because there are just rows and rows of vendors trying to vie for your attention.
Well, yeah, they won't leave you alone.
Yeah, so we had to like put our blinders on and just head straight to the pyramid.
So we went around. We saw another ball court. Chichen Itza, of course, has one of the largest. But what was really fascinating about Chichen Itza is...
I'm just saying. Okay.
All right, look what we got.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the most fascinating things I thought about Chichen Itza was that you didn't have to be a historian. You didn't have to be a historian to see the bloodlust that was painted on every single wall. I mean, there was a wall that had spikes out of it that heads were put on. There were paintings of how that they would offer their sacrifices. The pits that were everywhere where they would put the hearts that they would be sacrificing from the people that they killed. I mean, that was just everywhere, and it was prominent. You didn't need anybody to tell you about that. It was obvious what everything was.
Yeah, so Chichen Itza was massive. So there were multiple ball pits.
Ball courts.
There were multiple ball courts.
Right, so Chichen Itza, the steps plus the temple at the top, it equals the number of days in a year. They had just everything was built into the astrology of the place. Every single thing had a number that had a significant factor in it. The equinox, of course, is when the sun shines through the temple. The snake slides down. The snake looks like it's sliding down the stairs, and then it shines on the next temple and the next temple, all the way from the Americas down to South America. And they just are a succession as the sun goes around the earth during the day.
So Chichen Itza, there is so much detail and so much to see, so much description, so many ball courts, so many temples, so many structures, so many ruins. I mean, even there, we found out that there's even a temple underneath the main temple that they've just found out about but can't dig.
Yeah, inside Chichen Itza, inside the temple.
They don't allow people to climb it anymore because you'll fall and get, I guess too many people
fall.
Yeah, and they don't allow people inside it anymore because people have stolen some priceless artifacts.
If you can go to the top and you look inside, there was a jaguar with red ruby eyes, and those ruby eyes were stolen. So a lot of pillage was happened at all these ruins throughout the years.
Yeah, so kind of bummer you can't do that, but just seeing the sights is pretty fantastic. And as far as walking around with kids, it wasn't too bad either. It was kind of a lot of photo opportunities, big crowds.
We went during a really slow time of year, so the crowds weren't too bad, but we've heard it's shoulder to shoulder, especially if you go during the equinox. If you go during any one of the ends of the calendar cycles, all those things. But it was an awesome place to go with kids because there was a lot of history there, and it was a really interesting way of showing how people used to live. You know, they didn't live in sheetrock houses, and that was really cool for our kids to see. Yeah,
so once again, like gads of tour guides there if you're visiting. Definitely worth it to get a tour guide. They give you a lot of details you wouldn't be able to figure out otherwise.
Yeah.
But even nonetheless, even when we had time alone, we eavesdropped on other tour guides, and I think they could tell. But they were saying interesting things, so we kind of pillaged that information.
So while we were at Chichen Itza and Balam, we talked to the other people on our tour, of course, and one of the names that kept coming up was Coba. So Coba is one of the largest Mayan ruins in the Mexican Riviera. Sorry, in the Riviera Maya. I don't even know which one you call it.
Yeah, Coba was crazy.
So we decided to go to Coba. We had an extra day. We weren't going to do anything, but the thought of not going to Coba, so we couldn't pass up the opportunity to go to Coba. We had a car. We had an extra day, so we definitely wanted to make sure that we saw something else. We all agreed as a family that that's how we wanted to spend one of our last days. So we hopped in the car. The only negative I would say about going to Coba was that it's right by Chichen Itza and Balam, and it's a long drive. So we had already been all the way down there, and then we went all the way down there again. So that was a little rough with the kids, but it was well worth it when we got there.
But the draw to it, one of the reasons we really wanted to go, because it has the tallest pyramid of all of the ruins.
And you can climb it.
And it was definitely not the most restored.
No.
Pyramid. So
yeah, they just have started to uncover Coba, so there's so much that they don't know, and it had all these walkways that they found out, like 20,000 miles or kilometers or something of interconnected walkways.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah.
So basically, every mountain or hill in that area is there's a pyramid underneath it. Yeah. There's a giant temple or something. Yeah. And you can really see it at Coba because so much of it is being restored that you can see how quickly the trees grow. And so half of that temple is actually in complete ruins. And then they've started to reconstruct the stairs on it, which is, I guess technically it's stairs. So my daughter and I are the only ones that climbed it because it was raining.
Well, so let's tell them the story. So we got there. We found this first temple that's right near the entrance. And we went up it and we climbed and we looked around. And we were like, wow, that's awesome. And then it started to rain. So we hid in one of the tunnels. And then we were like, well, what do we do now? Thinking we had seen everything. And we saw all these, I don't know what you call them. They were trolleys on bikes. So they were bike trolleys. They're called something specific.
They're like bike taxis.
That's what they're called. So bike taxis. And one of the bike taxi operators came up and they were like, do you want a bike taxi? And we're like, no, we don't need it. We'll be fine. We'll walk. And they're like, well, it's like a 3-mile walk. And we're like, oh, it's not a 3-mile walk. There's no way it's a 3-mile walk.
It's a 3-mile walk. Yeah. So we're definitely, I think when you're with kids, I think doing the bike taxi is a must. And they loved it, so we had to do 2 bike taxis, and our kids were like, they're racing, and it was kind of raining too. So it's kind of a necessity. And so you pay them a little bit extra, and they'll stop at each ruin or each place and wait for you there.
Yeah, so we made a beeline for the temple, and it was pouring rain. I mean, you can see in the pictures, it was pouring rain, and I waited because I was hugely pregnant, and our little son didn't want to climb up, and then our youngest daughter didn't want to either. So Gabriel and Pi went up, and they climbed up, and luckily there is a rope that goes through the center of the stairs. You can kind of grab onto it if you feel uneasy or whatever. Oh, and we were all in flip-flops. Let's not forget that. Yeah. So they went up, and they got all these awesome views, and they got to see all the pictures and then describe it to us later, and we waited, and there's no shelter, so there's nowhere to wait out of the rain. We all just kind of stood there and waited for them to climb up, and it was really awesome. So then on the way back, that's when we stopped at all the sites, and we saw the cool like tower where they would speak from. It was like a pulpit tower, and we saw more ball courts. What else did we see?
Oh, it was massive. Yeah. It was, and the view from the top of that temple was breathtaking. It was definitely worth the climb. But I think what Coba just kind of like blew my mind is just how sprawling all these kingdoms were at the time, and learning that they were all interconnected, and just the amazing work of ingenuity that went into all that was just incredible.
Oh, you could tell they were so civilized. I mean, the way that everything was connected and how they did everything and built everything, and they painted them, and the mosaics and the illustrations and the drawings and the interior design, if you will. It was really cool.
Yeah, and I think from a world schooling aspect, it was kind of like life-changing, just getting that perspective of that civilization and how incredible it was. So definitely worth it. Go check them out.
All right, so those were the ruins that we went and saw. As we mentioned, we did use a tour guide. The tour guide we opted for was Alma's LDS Tours. They took us to Chichen Itza, Balam, and Ikkil, which was a cenote, and then we also got lunch with that. And they picked us up at our hotel. They dropped us off at literally right outside the doors of our hotel. We didn't have to meet them anywhere. Everything was included. The kids were a great price, and we loved them. They were so informative. They answered all of our questions. They gave a lot of not only historical information, but scriptural information, and they also gave a lot of, what would you say, there's definitely different theories about how things were used, things that they're not sure about. So we got all of that takeaway from it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the perk to doing a tour is that you're taken care of every step of the way. And with kids, you can't beat that. As well as we made some really close friends on the tour. I would say if you're...
Shout out to Sabi and Chris.
Good peeps. Touring on your own, definitely it has its perks too, as you're in a little bit more control. It kind of does stink, have to drive hours to different places. But we always ended up using either a tour guide or a taxi while we were there. So
I guess we would say takeaway is get your tour guide in advance so you can know that they're who you want to use.
I think so. It made life easy.
Yeah.
It was so nice.
And the nice thing, we did not have a tour guide in Coba, but the bike taxi operators, they knew a lot of information. We were able to ask them a lot of questions. So in a sense, we kind of did get a little guide there at the end too.
Yeah.
So versus driving versus tour guide, definitely we would say go for a tour guide.
Okay.
So that's how we did it. And then we kind of touched on where the ruins are, but they're not in Cancun. They're not in Playa del Carmen. They're outside of Tulum. So once you get to Tulum, you'll see Tulum, and then you're going to go inland. So you're going to go west, and then that's where most of the ruins are going to be. So in terms of where you want to stay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's definitely where we would recommend staying. All right, so then the last thing is, we've kind of briefly touched on it, but there are so many world schooling opportunities when you go see the Mayan ruins. Some of the topics you can discuss are history, botany, geology, culture, ancient civilizations, the technology that was used at the time, what communities looked like, what religion looked like, and of course the big one is astronomy.
Yeah, our kids were enamored with all of it, especially the bugs. So many different kind of bugs. That caterpillars that were like the size of your arm and crazy trees. There's so much nature there. It's amazing.
So one of the things we did end up bringing home was our own Mayan calendar. So the way the calendars worked is they were actually kind of like they were a wheel, and then you could move the different months and they'd move them around. So we got a version of that. Ours doesn't move around, but it shows you what the months were called and how they kind of worked and the symbols that they used for them. So that was a really cool takeaway for us.
Yeah. So I think that's our overview of the Mayan ruins in Cancun. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Like we say, we're still getting used to this, and so we are hopefully get better and better. And I shouldn't have said that.
All right, so you can find us on diapersonaplane.com. You can find our free world schooling worksheets on the website, as well as not only the lesson guide, but the worksheet you can give to your kids. You can find all of our experiences, lots of pictures. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can also check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Indeed.
And we'll see you next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about Mexico again, but that time we're going to be talking about all the fun water things you can do, like cenotes, and we went to the water park Xel-Há. So we'll see you then.
Bye!
So just really quick, hon, why are people going to listen to our podcast if we just give them, no information?